friends. Welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Danita Cummins. And today on this episode, I'm super excited to introduce you to Coach Damon Parker. He's the executive director for the Jones Project, which is a Kansas-based nonprofit that was founded in 2022 in memory of Josh Jones, who died of suicide in 2021. I found the Jones Project just through the normal internet search of things, but their mission to bring the message of hope and healing to secondary students to help them erase the stigma of getting help for mental health was something that just really laid on my heart as a mom and as a warrior and as a friend who has watched people that I love navigate through that hard space over the years. I thought that it was worth telling their story. So I am super excited to share Damon's passion and the nonprofit's mission with you today. I hope that you find some tools and techniques to help you have hard conversations if that's something that you need to do. And as we're busy getting back to school with all of the efforts of collecting shoes and supplies and all the things, I thought it was important to take the time to talk to Damon about the great things that they're doing at the Jones Project to shed some light on a conversation about mental health and some ways that we can keep the lights on for those that we love. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. Let's get started. Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Creatives. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Called Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Called Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast, and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow. Hey friends, welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Danita Cummins, and today I'm joined by Coach Damon Parker. He's the executive director for the Jones Project, which is a nonprofit based in Kansas, right?
Correct.
That you guys serve and work in memory of Josh Jones. And we'll talk a little bit about his story today, but super excited to have him come on the podcast today and talk about his perspectives and all the amazing things that the nonprofit is doing. So thanks, Coach, for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. This is so cool. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. Thanks for doing all this. We actually lost power earlier today, so you're the first guest that actually got turned back on when the power came back on about an hour ago. So
right.
I forgot to mention that. So yeah, I'm glad we got to do this today. So do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to be where you are today with the Jones Project?
Yeah, man, I could probably take up the entire hour just given that backstory because I've had a very non-traditional path, at least compared to other people I've talked to that kind of work in the same space. I was a teacher and a coach for, 21, 22 years, something like that. Last year was my first year as an adult not being an educator. And so now I run an organization called the Jones Project, which is a 501c3 nonprofit where we essentially go around and talk to high school kids and middle school age kids about the topic of mental health and suicide prevention. And I got into that because I had done some professional speaking things in the past. And in 2021, my wrestling teams did something that no other team in history had ever done. And not just in Kansas, that's in the United States. We won the Kansas State Championship for boys and girls. And nobody had ever won two in the same season before. And then I quit. I immediately resigned right after the banquet. And I still coach the girls team, but the boys team that, I spent 10 years building from scratch. There's really not a program when we first started that thing, not one that was very notable anyway. And so that kind of raised some eyebrows, and I just kind of cited vague health issues at the time when I quit. And then very shortly after that, I mean, the universe works in strange ways, man. There was a guy at a company here in town. The company is Advisors Excel. It's this really big intermediary between financial advisors and their customers. And this guy was a very prominent person in our community. I had never met him, but my wife worked over there. His name was Josh Jones. And on March 5th of 2021, shortly after my resignation, he died by suicide. And I went to that funeral. And that was just kind of my wake up call, because those vague health issues that I was talking about were my mental health issues that I've been struggling with probably since I was in 8th grade, and had never received or even actively sought out help for. Like most coaches or people that are in a masculinity driven occupation, I was, I can handle this myself. I've handled everything in my life by myself. Why should this be any different? And I go to that funeral, and that was just my moment of clarity, where it was like, if I don't change something, then there's a good chance that we're going to end up in this exact same position. Yeah. Because Josh Jones was one of those guys that was just universally loved, and he was the life of the party. And we all know that one person, or used to know, that died by suicide. And say, man, I never would have thought it would be him or her. I never would have even known that they were struggling with something, And I think that that's a pretty common thing. And I was in that position. And so I had resigned from wrestling coaching because it was just like, man, I'm just doing too much. I'm spread too thin. I got to get myself figured out. And then, when I went to that funeral, I was like, man, that kind of highlighted the urgency of the situation for me, because he was about my age. So from there, started meeting with a guy named Cody Foster, who's the founder of that company, Advisors Excel. I honestly don't even remember how we started going out to lunch and stuff, but just a mutual connection through my wife who works there. And eventually he says, we got to try to find the silver lining in this situation, because Josh was his best friend. And I had done some professional speaking before that. And he was like, let's take your skill set of being a speaker that connects really well with kids, and we can start this nonprofit called the Jones Project. And then we can just do what we can to make this terrible situation that we're in right here, have something positive come out of it. And so, I think most people leave education because of two reasons. Like, they're either, number one, like, quite honestly, they're fed up with it because it's a hard job, or they're of retirement age. And I was neither of those. Like, it's rare that you see someone that like loves their job as a teacher and then bounces. But that's what I did. I knew it was going to take something really special to pull me away from education. And this is it. I tell people, like, I'm still in education. I just have a bigger classroom now. That's right. We spend a lot of time on the road. Last year, we were on 91 stages and talked to 31 some thousand kids, and school started here in Kansas this week. And I was in a school on their very first day of school, which was really cool, and it's just been kind of this grassroots thing where once people kind of caught wind of what we're doing, it just kind of exploded, because, it's professional speakers cost money. I didn't realize that until I started doing it myself. But through this, we do it 100% free of cost to every school that we go to, and every school can afford free. We wanted to remove that hurdle. So we spend a lot of time in really small rural communities, because those are areas that are really underserved when it comes to mental health access. Because if you're 4 hours away from the closest town with 10,000 people in it, that's right. It's really tough getting help that's not virtual. And I'm not there for very long, but like, just having kids out there know that there's somebody that has their back, that's been through what they're going through, that they can then reach out to after the fact. I think it's been very, very effective. And to that point, like, we haven't done a single cold call on this thing. Like, all of those schools that we went to last year, it's just been word of mouth, and people say like, oh man, you did a good job. This was good for our kids. Like, you should have them out to your school. And it's just kind of worked that way. And we've been able to fill our calendar with it, and it's really rewarding work. And I think we're making an impact.
Yeah, no, that's so amazing. I think, like you said, a silver lining, take something that is really hard, right? And people don't understand like the why. We always ask why, and try to turn it into something, that helps other people. I think that's all we can kind of ask for in our life legacy. If we were to say, these are the things I want to leave behind, someone to see something beautiful inside our broken pieces. So I think that's a huge blessing. When you talk about your mental health, like you said, you were young and you struggled with these things for years. Do you find that there was a time as a young student or person that it was hard for you to define like that? And I just am thinking through, like, the language, right? Being able to put language around and when you're young, feelings are hard. And even when you're older, feelings are hard. So
For sure.
in your journey, I guess, can you share a little bit about that, like how you've navigated that space before you got to the Jones Project and just being able to kind of like navigate your own mental health journey and define it?
Absolutely. I can't define it and I talk about that in a lot of the presentations that I give to kids, is when I was coming out of 8th grade, I was probably when I was about 13 years old. In 1993, nobody ever said the word depression. That wasn't the thing that people talked about, And so I had no idea really what was going on, but it was just like the way I describe it is, it felt like I was sitting on the shore and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden I would just get blindsided by this wave of negative emotion. And sometimes that would be a wave that lasts for an afternoon. And sometimes it felt like it lasted for a month. And I had no idea like why this was happening. From what I could tell, and everybody kind of internalizes that kind of stuff, especially when they're young, or especially back then. But it didn't seem like anybody else was going through that kind of stuff. So it was just like in that era of, and I was a football player and a wrestler and all that, and the whole suck it up, like be tough, all that kind of stuff. And so, and dudes are really, really good at that until we're not. And then once we're not, that's when things get really, really bad for people. And so, I did not seek any kind of counseling or help or from anybody at all until the day of Josh's funeral, March 12th of 2001. And that's when we left that funeral and I got in the car and I had what could only be described as a total abject mental breakdown. And I just brought it up with my wife. And I was like, look, this has been going on and we got to do something about it or it's not going to be good. And when I tell people that, I can sense that they're thinking like, oh man, there's no way that you could have kept that a secret from the woman that you love, that you've lived with for 15 years. She would have noticed something was going on. And that I think that's nonsense because when you have any kind of secret, especially one like this, like you get really good at reading other people's social cues and you know what they want to hear and you know what they don't want to hear. And you act accordingly so that you don't have to have those difficult conversations so that you can keep secret whatever it is that you want to keep to yourself. And I found myself in that position. And then after we had that conversation, and my wife's a coach too. So it's like, all right, it's game plan time, so we hashed out a game plan. And it's like, once we started getting into that and like having those open, honest conversations, my only regret from the whole situation was that I didn't do it earlier. The way that God and the universe works, I feel like I was supposed to be at that funeral for whatever reason. We'll find out someday, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it was a tough situation and something that I didn't quite honestly handle very well myself. Like a lot of people spend a whole lot of time stuffing feelings down, trying to ignore them or trying to numb them with substance abuse issues, all that kind of stuff. And we finally put all of that behind us. And now we're ready to get on with our lives starting at age 42.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, not to speak for you, but is that a big piece of what you're, trying to offer the students too? And like, hey, don't wait till you're 42 or don't wait until you get to the edge of the cliff. Yeah. Start early, find a friend. I think that the language is super important. And I agree with you. I think depression, I'm a graduate of the 95, era of high school. And we didn't really talk about depression a lot or anxiety. It wasn't a term that we really used that was as common as I find it today with my high schoolers, my young adult students. Anxiety is something that we talk about all the time. And then as parents, trying to define that language and again, try to understand what does that mean? How do we verbalize that? I think is really hard. It's just really hard. I had a kind of one of those processes too, like you're sharing that, like where the, dam broke kind of thing. And it was an interesting conversation with my husband because when I said that, like, hey, I need help, and he was kind of like, it caught him off guard. And so I can relate to that. Like, well, how can you miss that when you're living with someone every day or when you're like married, or parents? But the reality is we do because it's just the nature of who we are as humans.
And sometimes you intentionally miss it and sometimes it's unintentional. Like my wife has said, I've heard her say a lot since then. It's like, she beat herself up a lot because she's like, man, I should have known. And there were times where, I saw all these different warning signs and I just basically convinced myself that that's not what was going on because I didn't want to believe that it was true,
Right.
So and like through no fault of her own, like I can't imagine being in that kind of situation. But it's not an easy thing to handle whether you're the person going through it or the person that's supporting them.
Yeah. And I take what you're saying too. I say that, like we talked about before, like I've served in the military for almost 30 years, right? In and around the military. And a big part of post 9/11 coming home after the war and losing friends through suicide and just major things,
Right.
I've kind of walk that too personally. But what you said I thought was so important because you made the comment, like you're sports and you're a guy and you just suck it up and you just, keep moving forward. And I see that a lot in our military community as well. We
For
value
sure.
strength in the military. Being a warrior it's all of you. It's your identity. It's everything, and warriors imply strength and warriors. So to get to that place where you surrender, for lack of a better word, in your mind that you're saying I'm vulnerable and I'm weak and I can't do this. It is a huge thing, So I have great empathy for my brothers and sisters at arms who struggle with mental health because it's hard, to admit that you're not the strongest person in the room every day. So I thank you
Absolutely.
for sharing that too, I guess, as a kindred spirit of seeing how that really looks on people.
I was just gonna say, as far as I think a lot of times when people go through this thing, man, is like everybody's experience is their own experience. And I spent a long time thinking to myself, how hard is my life?
Mm.
I'm a wrestling coach. And my family lives relatively comfortably, and I've got two beautiful, happy kids, and I'm going through this. It's not like I've got bullets whizzing over my shoulder for my job, And so
Yeah,
there's a lot of guilt, I think,
sure.
that goes along with that. But I would encourage anybody that's listening to get past that, man, because you don't have to watch somebody else die in combat for this to be something that affects you. Now, that's certainly not minimizing what's going on in the military. I can't imagine feeling the way that I've felt, but then having some of the experiences that you've had. I can see how that
Yeah.
could just be absolutely crippling for a person. So
Yeah.
yeah, everybody's kind of got their own experiences, and it takes work to get over them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. We minimize our own self, right? Because we say that from resiliency. I had 3 women who came on this summer, veterans, all veterans, females, and we talked about their faith and freedom journey, and they all talked about their stories. And there was this theme of resiliency, right? And we kind of tell ourselves, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But I think we do that comparison thing when it gets to the resiliency. We're like, oh, well, you should just be able to handle it. You should just be able to handle it. And that's not true, right? That's not true. And
Right.
I think with mental health too, I think it's beautiful that you guys are going into these schools and helping students put language around it and giving them a place to put this, on the table. You're putting yours on the table, creating a space for them to put theirs on the table, because we don't inherently know how to handle these things. How to get up, you're taught how to feed yourself, you're taught how to walk, you're taught how to, do math and read, but you're not taught the emotional health and wellness. You're not taught how
Right.
to do those things. And so, yeah, I think that's very valuable. So when you guys go into the schools and you give your presentation and you speak, and then what's the aftermath? What's after the story, when you guys leave or whatever, what happens then?
It really just kind of depends on the school.
Yeah.
Because, we go into some of these schools that have really comprehensive mental health programs. They're doing something at least once, if not 2, 3 times a week. Then we go
Yeah.
into some places that it's just, they kind of cross their fingers and hope for the best. And then there's everything in between. And the way that we describe what we do to people is we're just the tip of the spear. We want to get the conversation started. We want to make this something that's okay to talk about within your building. And then there's no way that I can do follow-ups. Like last year, we were in 91 different places. I can't do consistent follow-ups with 91 different schools. You know what I mean? It's I set the table, but it's teachers, admin, it's your job to take it from there. And as far as what the aftermath is like for me from a school, one thing I was really concerned about, my favorite part about teaching for so long was just those real connections that you make with kids, and having kids reach out to you when they were going through something hard or when they needed advice on a certain situation or whatever. And I thought that I was going to lose that, but I haven't. In fact, I think it may have gone deeper. But that's the coolest thing about social media, man, is social media can be used for good or for evil, and people want to vilify it all the time. But at the same time, what we do is we make it really, really accessible for the kids in our audience. And a lot of those kids that, I have a ton of them that always come up and talk to me afterwards. But sometimes those kids that really need to talk don't want to do it in person because they're more comfortable right here, And so we're going to meet them where they're at, and we make that available to them. And, I get messages from some kids that I've kept in contact with since September of last year, like
Wow.
if I had kids in my PE class that I didn't have a super great connection with, they'll be with me for a semester and I probably wouldn't see them very much after that, and there were always a few that I did, but with this, there have been some kids that really need somebody in their life that they can trust, that they can talk to. And this social media has provided an opportunity for that. And plus, if we get a message from a kid that's really concerning, something that if they were my student, I would absolutely report because I'm a mandated reporter because I still coach.
Right.
Then I've got it in their words and I can call their school counselor and say, hey, you need to check in with this person, and that rarely happens, but occasionally it does. And so, yeah, that's kind of what the aftermath looks like for me is with those kids that need somebody to talk to, we're always here for them. And good God, man, I get 100 or more messages from kids a week. And every school we go into, that adds another kid into that bank. And so I have to carve out time out of the day to get in there and check those things. And which is great, because it's every one of those little texts or direct messages or whatever you call them from which different platform. I mean, that's a kid coming in my office. Yeah, it's no different than what we used to do. It's just they're not doing it in person.
That's right. Yeah. And they're, like you said, now you have your office is really big. It's not just one building.
Right.
Now you have multiple offices. I can see how that would get overwhelming as a person, just thinking from compassion fatigue and, 100 voices and 100 messages. So from an organizational perspective, do you see the nonprofit growing in that space where you guys, as you continue to grow and reach more students, do you see that as something that you guys have talked about? Like, okay, we go out and we speak, and then now we have this reach back, how do we manage that? Is that something you guys?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. I have an assistant and she's actually going to be the one that cuts up this video, posted on our social media and all that. Hi, Mary, by the way.
Yeah.
She lives in the Philippines. She's awesome. And what she does is, like there's, especially with me being on the road a lot, we drove 10,000 some miles last year. So I can't just sit there and scroll through Instagram all day. And so she will go through and I'll carve out some time on the weekend to go through and answer the messages that are pretty benign, but she has access to all those accounts too. And I can't remember if I said this a second ago. She's a part-time virtual assistant. She lives in the Philippines and she works for me for 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock a.m. her time. She's incredible.
Wow.
But she goes through and she reads these messages. And, if there's one that's concerning or one that needs an immediate response, she will send me an email and say hey, you need to get on this one. And so that's how we kind of manage that. And the other thing too is for someone that grew up and lives in the Philippines, I'm not really concerned about the anonymity factor for the kids. Sure. I really don't have a problem with her reading their messages because she's never going to meet those kids. They'll not have any contact and she has good intentions. But, if we had, Steve Smith that lives in St. Louis running our social media and, it was a different account or whatever, kids wouldn't message him. They want to see the person that they talk to in their auditorium or that they saw on their stage or whatever, so we're kind of building this ship as we sail out to sea. So we're going to have to try to figure something out there. But what my hope is that, as these kids that are reaching out to me now go on and move on to the next phase of their life, then they find that next connection because I don't want to be their connection. I am super happy to be, and I love it. And it's my favorite part of the job. But what I want is somebody local that they have no problem going in and knocking on the door and having a face-to-face conversation with a real human being that's right in front of them that knows them really well. That's my ultimate goal for these kids. And so I try to nudge them in that direction as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just thought that too. You're trying to create community, right? You're trying to, like you said, break down that stigma and create community where we can have conversations. And those conversations are long after you're gone. So, and that is the challenge, right? How do you create, because there is degrees of intimacy that are required. And I was not an educator, but I, I have 4 children and I homeschooled for a while and I have great heart for educators, who commit themselves to the practice of being, a leader in their schools and loving on these kids every day. So my heart is always in there. And I can just from our personal watching guidance counselors with hundreds of students. And, there's so much that the administrators are trying to do every day. They only have 8 hours in the day. So that's why I thought too, how do you, because it is a system of systems that you're trying to navigate. So you're trying to help one person, but you're trying to break down barriers to entry for the healthcare system. And you're trying to break down barriers to entry for educators and lack of resources. So you're really trying to solve a big problem that's complex with the resources that you have. So I just thought that that's I don't know, maybe a challenge or an offer or opportunity to the world or people who are listening that like, hey, you guys are out here doing your piece, like you said, tip of the spear, but building that framework for that connective tissue inside the organizations is fundamentally important too. So you're not saying, hey, we'll just come in and talk and leave. Like we know that this is a long game and, we're trying to help these families.
It is a really long game. And that's what's going to happen is it is what it is. There's a lot of old dog administrators. There were administrators when I was in high school, that were those same football coaches that tell you, toughen up, be a man, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what's happening, you can feel that pendulum swinging in the opposite direction now. Kids are a lot more willing to talk about it nowadays. And those kids are going to grow up and those kids are going to become administrators and they're going to understand the value of spending time on this kind of stuff. And we know that we're not going to get out and just completely fix this issue in the next 2-3 years. It doesn't work that way. But at the same time, if we can plant that seed, it's like the old saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? 30 years ago. Second best time is today. And if it takes 15, 20 years to get these kids up and into a position where they're the ones with their boots on the ground that can actually make that tangible difference in that building, then I'm happy to be the one that plants the seed.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And sometimes you need that. Like sometimes you need an outsider coming in to just say, hey, we're going to talk about this, and that's a variety of different things you could use. Faith, you could use all different scenarios, but sometimes it is needed someone outside coming in and saying, hey, let's have this hard conversation. Do you envision in like your future dreaming when you guys are mapping out your plane that's in flight, that you're building it in flight as your analogy, right? As we're flying it, as we're building it, that there would be some opportunity for like Jones Project chapters or something where like kids could like small group kind of stuff. Have you guys thought through that or talked through that? Like a leave behind
we
kit,
have a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's the really tricky part because again, every school and every community is so dang different. Because there's no standardization in our state on like what you're supposed to do every week, and I don't think that there should be because like people think of Kansas as, Little House on the Prairie type stuff, but like we have some really large communities and we have some really low income communities and we have some really affluent communities. We have some communities that are almost 100% Hispanic. And then we've got some that are like as country white kid as you could possibly be. And those are all vastly different cultural scenarios when it comes to mental health type stuff.
That's right.
And so you come out with a curriculum and you're like, hey, here's this thing, I'm going to leave it behind. Half the counselor's going to look at it and be like, this doesn't fit. This isn't going to work for our families, And so like, I would love to see, and it's again, like I'll go to Kansas City and be in a gym that has 2,100 kids in it. And then I'll go out to Western Kansas and I'll be in a school where they've got 21 kids in the entire school, and while the presentation works in both because like your personal story, that connects with anybody. But when you get to the real specifics on this is what you guys need to do. Oh, you need to set up an appointment with a therapist. The closest therapist is 6 hours from here, dog. Like that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that's really tricky. But to answer your question, we are not saying no to any kind of ideas about how to branch out, how to make what we do more effective and cover a larger swath of the country because right now it is what it is. It's a one-man operation and I can only be on one stage at a time. And the tricky part is as a speaker, when you tell your personal story, you're the only person that can do that. Nobody else can get up there and tell my story and they can tell theirs, but it might not fit with exactly what we're doing. And I'm like, there have been some kids out there that I've talked to afterwards and like they've come up to me and wanted to chat and, I can tell that they've been going through it, but at the same time, man, they're such effective communicators and they're so stinking smart. And there have been a couple that I've been like, all right, you just go get that college degree real quick and then holler at me here in 4 years because like, I need you, because like right now I'm right on the edge of being too old to connect with some of these guys, not quite there yet, but I'll know when it happens. And I think we're only a few years away from that. And we need some young blood in it, man. Like I can't do this forever. So I'm hoping that we can branch out. And if we can, especially like I'm partial to Kansas and like it's where I grew up. It's where my heart is. And so if we can have Kansas kids that can do this thing, holy cow, it'd be great. And we've had so many requests on this thing that we've had to turn down all the out of state stuff with a couple of exceptions. Like we've had some pretty substantial donors that believe in what we're doing. And, then we'll go to their alma mater or we'll go to their place of business or what have you. But I would love to have this thing continue to get bigger and bigger. And, we've certainly had the opportunity to leave our state, but we need more resources to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's only so many hours in the day because as an executive director, you're doing all the things like you're saying, and hats off to Mary. So, but yeah, it's hard. I started a nonprofit 5 years ago. And so I'm in this weird like board chair / treasurer / executive director / marketing person. So I have a great heart for the,
how that goes.
Yeah. And you're right. It's your story. So it's great to find momentum and people come alongside you, but it is hard, when you're the founder, and that's really a kind of pretty intimate connection there for a while on an organizational level. Yeah. So I just thought it would be really cool. Like, I'm just thinking through like, our community is really rural too. And so the comments about 2 hours or 4 hours to find a counselor, that's exactly what we go through right out here. I mean, just in our own, it's 2 hours to Charlotte, 2 hours to Raleigh. And so it takes us, a couple of hours. And I understand telehealth is great and it's a great resource, but there's also that need to sit in front of somebody and have a human connection. And at least for my kids and the kids I see and we work with in the community, they want a real person sitting on the other side. So that's a community problem, I think, is what I was together as a community coming together to solve those challenges. So let's see. So I had some questions in here and we pretty much have talked through all of them, but do you have any advice? That's probably a loaded question. So we'll ask you, do you? But what advice would you offer to students and maybe their, friends and family in that circle that are going back to school, kind of getting back into the swing of things? Is there any kind of advice that you can offer to the kids as they go back to school and how they navigate this season and have hard conversations?
Absolutely. Whenever I go into a school, kids don't learn, and not just kids, like human beings don't learn by seeing bullet points on a slide and statistics on a slide. They learn by story. If you can tell a really entertaining story, that's how you can get people to move to action and get people to retain information. And I was not an effective teacher because I was the smartest guy in the room. Nobody's ever accused me of that, but I was a pretty effective storyteller. And so kids enjoyed being in my classes. But this is something that I tell our kids whenever I go into a school. It's like CDC had a report that came out last year that said during the previous year, 44% of high school kids in this country self-reported that during the past year, they persistently felt sad or hopeless. Like, that's half of us. And I tell the kids, like, I'm here today, not even really to talk to the 44%, because you guys know you got something going on. You know what you should be doing. You just need to do it. Right. So part of it is to convince you what to do. And if you don't know, we'll tell you what to do. But the main thing is I'm talking to 56% on how you can be a supportive friend, how you can help out these people, some of which you may not even know their first name. And without knowing it, you might be the person that saves their life. So that's something that we talk about with everybody. It's like, this thing is not just for the people that are struggling. It's almost more for the people that aren't, just so that you understand that, yes, this thing is real. This thing is a killer, and it affects people that have checked a lot of those boxes that you have on your goal list. Those, I tell them, it's like, how many of you want to be a college athlete, Division I? And like, anybody that plays a sport puts their hand in the air and say, okay, yeah. I did that. Okay. How many of you want to be captain of your football team? Every dude on the football team raises their hand. It's like, okay, I did that too. Like, this thing doesn't discriminate, you know? And so I think part of it is just helping those kids understand that, yes, this is a real thing. It's not something that people make up. Nobody fakes this. Right. But the second thing and this is for every kid, I used to give this to them in high school and all that, part of my first day conversation. You got to get involved. You have to get involved in something, because I tell kids the two most important tools that you have when it comes to keeping your mental health in a place where you want it to be. Number one is your people. And your people are not the people that are in your 4th hour class. Your people are not even your group of friends. Okay. Because the way I define your people is your people are the people that you get together with, usually outside of the school day, and you work towards a common goal. Yeah. Okay. That having a common goal is so important. And your friend group generally doesn't have a common goal, unless that's to sit around and gossip or go to a movie or whatever. And that's great. I'm not telling you don't hang out with your friends, but there's some kind of value that comes with working towards something with another human and accomplishing it. Yeah. Right. And that's why I think sports are so important, and being involved in band and in the theater department and all of those things, debate, forensics, whatever, doesn't matter. And you don't have to be the lead in the play. You can be the girl that holds the spotlight. She's just as important, but she's a part of that. Imagine what that play would look like in a dark auditorium with nobody up there holding the spotlight. Everybody plays a role. And then when your whole group of people has success, gosh, that's a really special thing that I think a lot of times folks miss out on as adults. Like how many adults get together with someone outside of the workday and work towards a common goal? Not many, and maybe it's your small family unit that you work towards, but at the same time, there's a finite window for that. And the example I used yesterday when I was in a school, last year for homecoming, like I'm obsessed with the show Stranger Things. Well, love that show. And last year for homecoming, as the leader of a large organization, we went with the Stranger Things theme. And these girls made this Demogorgon out of paper mache that was 22 feet tall. Like it was in this combine shed on the back of this truck, like with huge door. We had to take it off of the truck just to get it out the door. Like it was enormous, so big that when we drove it the half mile to the high school, it kept blowing over in the truck because it was just too much wind resistance. It was incredible. Spent over 500 woman hours combined putting this thing together.
Yeah.
That parade was 11 minutes and 23 seconds long because it ain't about the parade. Okay. It's about taking all these girls, putting them in a no pressure environment and drawing our new people, like our freshmen, our newcomers into the circle. Because you know what you're not doing when you're making a 22-foot tall paper mache Demogorgon? You're not staring at your stupid cell phone. You're talking to the person next to you. You're developing those real connections so that, down the road, when you got something big going on in your life, now you've already got a connection with somebody that you might not have had before.
That's right.
And now you can lean on those people. And I'm not just talking like a year or 2 years down the road. I'm talking 5, 10 years down the road, until you find your next group of people. And then it's kind of, I guess as adults, we call it networking, but as kids, there's an added element of that working towards something together that you don't get in a networking function as a 42-year-old,
Yeah.
And so, tell kids, especially at the beginning of the year, like that. I was in one school earlier this week. It was their first day. And then yesterday I was at school. It was their second day. I was like, now is the time, man. Like, don't sit around and wish that you would have gone out for football 4 weeks from now when you're going to the games. Like, even if you stink, go join the team and be a cheerleader on the sideline, man. But you have to have something. And your people is the number one tool that I tell kids they have to have. But the most important tool is your trusted adult. Okay. And your trusted adult is that person that, if you've got your deepest, darkest secret in your life that you don't want to tell anybody, but if you got one adult in that building that works there, and it doesn't have to be a teacher. Okay? It could be a coach, a sponsor, custodian, cafeteria worker, whatever. But if you got that one adult that if push came to shove, you'd be okay with telling them that secret. Okay, cool. You got a trusted adult. You're good. Okay. But if you don't have that person, and you got to do that personal inventory there. But if you don't have that person, you got to find one. And the best way to do that is to get involved in something that sparks your interest. Because chances are, if you decide, you know what, I'm going to go try out for the dance team this year. I've always wanted to at least give it a shot. You go do dance. Then you've got an adult that leads that organization that has a similar interest in you. And chances are you're going to mesh with that person. And if you don't, then that's why you get involved in a ton of activities. We have a wrestling program that I coach that there's no other way to say it. It's a dynasty. All we do is win. And when we don't, it's really weird, and I don't want those girls wrestling year round. I want them doing 2, if not 3 other sports. I want them doing things during the summer that don't have anything to do with our sport. That doesn't mean I don't want them to put in any work in the off season, but I think the more you diversify your group of people, the more you diversify those adults that you're working with, the more people you got to lean on when things aren't going really well. So yeah, that would be my big advice to kids going into school right now is get involved in something and find your trusted adult.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I agree with you too. And in those experiences is where you kind of grow. And like you're saying, I know for me in my experience and even my kids, I found it very much a blessing to have the tribe, like a village raising them, because there were times, so as a parent, right, there were times when they just didn't hear me or I couldn't speak into their life in a certain way. And that's okay, right? That's okay. Sometimes you're too close to it. So I think that's another lesson kind of as a community coming around side, volunteering into your community as a parent or a person, going into these places and offering some time is hugely valuable because these kids do need somebody who's not mom and dad always to still be there in their life and to pour into them, to make them, to mold them into the well-rounded person and to see those hidden I say jewels, but I think of like parenting as a lot like sculpting. We can either take the chisel and we can knock off your arm, or we can just etch out that fine line that's inside the rock that was already there, right? And that is the skill, I think, when we talk about any kind of level of leadership. It's like, just use the chisel, don't always use the hammer. And sometimes that's somebody else, not, in your familial chain, that's going to be the one that's going to help you. So I think that's so important too. And I've seen that with my kids in our own life too, just the blessing of them being involved, having other adults pour into them, confided in their teachers and their coaches and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, that's good stuff.
Gives them a different perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Because I say that all the time. We don't see ourselves on the outside. We only see what we see on the inside, right? We only get caught in our own comparison. And so you do need somebody else outside of you to tell you, no, that's not who you are. This is who you are. This is what you're good at. This is what I see in you. Keep going. Keep going.
That's hard to see the picture when you're stuck inside the frame. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, how can people connect with you or get involved with the nonprofit? Do you want to share that information on the podcast?
Yeah, for sure. Easiest way to do it is if you go to thejonesproject.org. That's it. And there's a contact us form button right there that sends me an email directly. There's all of our links to our socials are on there too, but those sometimes get lost in the wash a little bit, or at least take a little while for me to get back to. So yeah, somebody wants to reach out or has questions or whatever, like easiest way to do it is through that contact form on thejonesproject.org.
Gotcha. Okay. And I've been to the website, so you can donate there if anyone wants to donate. You're a 501c3. Is there anything specifically other than, I say donations, and I don't say that because I'm a nonprofit person too. So there's always, money donations that are needed. But are there other things that you guys coming up this year that you need, that if people wanted to help with?
Ideas. That's it. We're, again, like trying to, as we build this thing as we go, like I have always been the kind of person, like I get really put off, like when I'm working with someone who wants to come up with reasons why we can't do something instead of solutions as to how we can make it work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when people come to me with ideas, if it's something that fits with our mission and something that I haven't thought of, it's like, oh, let's make this happen. We can do this. We'll come up with a way. And it's our tagline that we use over and over again in our talks, and it's all over our website, is find a way. That's our slogan, man. And, so we try to find a way to implement a lot of things that other people have brought to us. And that's essentially what we're doing right now. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I've never run a nonprofit. I was a teacher for 22 years, like when the funny story, like I was telling you about that guy, Cody, earlier, the founder of Advisors Excel, this was his idea. We're sitting down at lunch and he's like, I'm thinking about starting a nonprofit and I want you to be the executive director. What do you think about that? And I was like, hold that thought. I got to go to use the restroom real quick. I go to the restroom and I Googled what is an executive director of a nonprofit. Because I knew that nonprofits existed. I had no idea how they were run or what they did. Because I'd been in this little education bubble my entire life. Like both my parents, grandparents, teachers, everybody. And so, I didn't know anything about it. And so, which means that it's kind of like when a new wrestler comes to me, and they don't have any bad habits and they listen because, they don't know what they're doing. And they're like, okay, well, I guess I'll trust you. It's the same thing here. So like when somebody comes to me with a really good idea, it's like, okay, yeah, let's run with that. So if there's somebody out there that listens to your show that maybe kind of works in the same space or says, even if we're probably not going to go to Alaska to speak to a high school, but if there's somebody up there that hears this and they think, you know what, if they came to our school, I would really like if he would do X, Y, Z. Man, gosh, that's so helpful. Yeah. So if you've got an idea for it, send it our way. That is every bit as valuable as a monetary donation.
Yeah, that's so good. I know from my business coaching and consulting side, I do work with a lot of people who are founders to small businesses or nonprofits. And exactly like you said, they're like, I want to start a nonprofit. Now, what do I do? And they're like, step one, right. And then they're like, jump off the cliff. And you're like, it's a big shift to govern a nonprofit. And it does look different. So hats off to you guys for being brave enough to try, because it is not for the faint of heart, for sure. Yeah. From one founder to another, my heart is too. That's why I do my coaching business now, because I just have a heart for founders who are like, I have this thing I want to bring to the world and I just don't know, how to do it. So yeah, so that's super cool.
Well, the way I look at it is, who knows? who knows how long this thing's going to go. Like, we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of donors that have been very, very generous to us.
Yeah.
So we know we'll be able to keep the lights on at least for a few years. After that, who knows?
Yeah.
Like maybe that money dries up. Maybe the donors find another cause that they believe in more than ours. But what I've learned through this whole process, and like basically since Josh Jones's passing, is everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Like you build these things up in your brain to be these humongous things. And not that they aren't important, but at the same time, it's like if you spend your time and your efforts focusing on adding value to the lives of other people and trying to make their lives better, it doesn't matter how many times you get fired or if your nonprofit runs out of money or if you have to move to another state. None of that matters. It's all going to be fine because you've kind of got the mindset of growth and progress and service. And if that's your focus, like, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about anything, So hopefully we get to do this for a long time. I'm loving it. And if not, we'll enjoy the heck out of it while we do it.
Yeah. And you'll learn 1,000 lessons along the way. So that's good too.
I already have.
Yeah. I am sure. Yeah. Well, this is my last question for you, and I'll let you go.
Okay.
So why do you keep showing up every day, even when it hurts? What's your why?
Oh, man. I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Showing up, gosh, it's just, there are so many different ways to take that. Showing up as a father, showing up as a husband, showing up as a coach, or showing up as a speaker, or doing the job that I do. Or like, I don't know what direction you want me to go there.
I think just for you, the thing that comes to mind, like that kind of like, don't overthink it. Like the first answer that came to mind, like the first image that popped into your head.
First answer that came to my mind, and it probably covers all of those, is I got people counting on me. Whether that's my kids counting on me or my wife. And, I count on a lot of people too, but I try to approach my job now as there are kids out there counting on me that don't know they're counting on me yet.
Yeah.
And I have to show up for them. And what I do is, quite honestly, it's emotionally exhausting. It's, imagine going every single day and your job is to stand on stage and tell a whole bunch of strangers about the hardest thing that ever happened in your entire life. That's and get real detailed and real with it. It's not easy and it is difficult. And, with my therapist now, I do a lot of processing that kind of stuff because there are some days that are certainly harder than others, but it is so worth it, man. When those kids come up to me afterwards, and like I had this one girl last year that it's funny, we get done with these presentations. And when I was doing professional speaking for adults back in the day, or every place was the same. You'd have a dozen or so come, hey, great job. Thanks for coming. Kids come up and do the same thing, but then they want to tell you their entire life story. They're like, here's everything that's going on in my life. And, sometimes it's two kids and sometimes there's a line out of the auditorium. And last year I got done with this one small school and it was one of those line out of the auditorium situations. It got done at 2:30 on the dot. I didn't leave that building until 4:47 p.m. And because there's a line of kids that just wanted to hang and talk like forever. It was crazy. And then I get to the very end and there's always the one kid that you're really concerned about because they don't get in the line. They just kind of sit in the back corner of the auditorium and they wait for everybody else to clear out. And there's usually one of those in every school that I go to. And last year, this girl came up to me after everybody else had left the building. And she just came up and goes like, I just wanted to know if I could have a hug. And I gave her a big hug. And then I get home that night and there was an Instagram message waiting for me that said, thank you for the hug. I don't get very many of those.
Aww.
And it was like, that's why we show up for this thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's why we're doing what we do. And we're going to continue to do it for as long as we can because I think it's making an impact.
Yeah. That's good stuff. My eyes are leaking. It was good.
Yeah, mine are too. And we still keep in contact, man. Like she's a great kid.
Yeah.
Needs more hugs though.
Yeah, she needs more hugs. Yeah. So there you go. There's your new hashtag, need more huggers. Yeah. Recruiting huggers. Man, it was such a blessing to talk to you today. I thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing all that you guys are doing at the Jones Project. But yeah, just your heart for showing up every day and giving out hugs means a lot. So I would love to keep in touch. Definitely. If I can be any help, just holler. I'm a few years ahead of you on the nonprofit journey, but not much. So I'm happy to give you whatever resources I have in my toolkit.
I will certainly need some advice. Like, I'm not one of those people that's like, oh yeah, well, totally get in touch with you if I have a question. Like, I'm going to be on you, man, because I have questions every day on how to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's a different journey. Yeah. And if you let us know, we'll share it through our network too. But if you guys come through the nonprofit and you need something, donations for sure, we'll celebrate that. But if there's anything else you guys find out that you need along the journey, don't hesitate to ask, and we'll definitely share what we can share. So I think it's awesome. Thanks for doing what you're doing every day.
Terrific. Thanks for having me today. Appreciate you helping me spread the word.
Yes, it's so good. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. This podcast was brought to you by our amazing producers at Wildfire Creative Company. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please hop over to iTunes or Spotify, subscribe, rate it, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. And make sure you come back. We'll talk more about the essence and elements of leadership on the first and third Thursday of every month. If you enjoyed today's show, you can head over to danitacummins.com/podcast and gain access to additional free resources. But make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so you can stay up to date on the latest shows. Have an amazing day. Talk to you soon.